Good evening, everyone. I'm David Suddjian. Welcome to Bird Bombs, Helpful Bursts of ID Info. Spring Swallows, episode 15. And happy anniversary, Bird Bombs. April marks the 1-year anniversary. Our first episode was on spring into warblers last April, and now we've gone around the calendar year, and we're back in spring looking at some beautiful birds, or looking forward to looking at them. Spring swallows. And Bird Bombs is a little bit like a current events report here, because happening now, 6 species of swallows are returning to the Denver area. Now, maybe you've seen 1 or 2 or 3 already. Maybe you haven't seen any or just 1, but they are coming. And it's wonderful because these guys are beautiful birds coming from their wintering grounds in the tropics. And they're a bit of a spectacle. Yes, with warblers, we can see a few here and there, and they're wonderful to see. But with swallows, you might encounter hundreds of them. And you might have a flock with all 6 of these species in one group together during the time right now in spring. And also when we get inclement weather, then we get these great concentrations of birds at reservoirs and rivers. And it's just, it really is a spectacle. And then when things settle down, there they are nesting with us. And it's such a delight to look at them nesting in their cavities, or in trees, and in the bird boxes, and in their burrows in the ground, or with their mud nest, maybe right even on our front doorstep. And so that's really wonderful. And swallows do present some ID challenges. Not the least of the problem is that they may be far away or high up or in lighting situations that are tough, and you might see several different species together in one group. So here's how Bird Bombs is going to sort it out. We're going to use the Swallow Buddy system. We're going to pair them up, and notice the array on the screen here. We've got top to bottom, 2 in the left, 2 in the middle, and 2 on the right. That's our Swallow Buddy system for tonight, and I'm going to keep to that pattern as we go along. And so we've got these 2 cavity nesting swallows that are blue or green, blue/green, and white. Okay, and then we've got 2 swallows that nest in the earth, in the ground, and they are brown and white. And then we have 2 swallows that use mud to nest. There are mud nesting swallows, and they have very strong associations with people. All right, so here they are. Here's our lineup: cliff, barn, rough-wing, bank, violet green, and tree. Oh my. Whew, breathtaking. And if you haven't seen them yet, just think within a couple of weeks, this will be your reality if you put the effort out and you get out there. So which is your favorite? All right, so tonight we're talking about the family Hirundinidae, which is the swallow family, Hirundinidae. All right, so it's in the Passeriformes. These are perching birds. And worldwide, there are 89 different species of swallows. Colorado has 8, which is true for most of the US, although one of these is kind of rare in a lot of places. So 7 or 8 in a lot of places in the US. And we're going to focus on 6 of those tonight, 6 focal species. But before that, let's consider some swallow family characteristics. So there's some physical features that you're familiar with. They're long wings. They have very wide bills that don't project out very far from their face, very short legs when they're standing. One thing that's important to note is that males and females appear similar generally, either the same or at least similar in all of the swallow species we're looking at. Only in the purple martin are they markedly different, but we really don't see those too much in our area here in the Front Range, Denver metro area. And the younger birds look like adults either very early on or by the time they get to their 2nd year. So swallows are birds of open habitats, often feeding near water or over water. So that's an important characteristic: open and near water. And they gather there during spring storms. So if we have an encounter with a spring storm coming up later this month, we hope, or in May, because we need the moisture, those are great times to find swallows. And you can often find several species gathered together. Another neat thing about swallows, as I indicated, is that they do nest and live near humans. So we have a lot of opportunities to see them, often without too much effort. So here are our focal species, our 6 focal species: tree swallow, violet green, bank, northern rough-winged swallow, barn swallow, and cliff swallow. We do have 2 more swallows to think about in Colorado. The purple martin is one that does occur in our local Front Range region here, but only as a rarity. It is really a Western species in the state in terms of when and where it occurs. When is during the normal swallow time, but where it occurs is basically in the west of the divide, and here along the Front Range and over the prairies, it is a rarity. So we're not going to deal anymore with the purple martin tonight. Fantastic bird. And the cave swallow has only been recorded in Colorado just a couple times. I think only one fully approved Bird Records Committee record yet. Maybe there's a second one now, but very rare bird, occurring mostly to be looked for during the summertime, late summer, or maybe juvenile bird coming up our way. So we'll leave the purple martin and the cave swallow behind. So we see that in this group, there's 6 different genera, genuses, right? Genera. And we have the Tachycynetta here with 2 species in that one, Rhiparia, Stelgodopteryx, Hirundo, and Petrochelidon. All right, so those 6, those different genera plus the progeny for the martin. And notice we have some irregular 4-letter codes. So I'm going to revert to using the names or abbreviations or whatever over here on the right-hand side instead of the 4-letter codes, because they're irregular to avoid conflicting with some other similar ones. For example, the barn and the bank cannot both be BASW, so they did it differently. So we're going to use these ones on the right. And these are mostly no-nonsense names. I mean, tree, bank, barn, cliff is awesome. But then you get like northern rough-winged swallow. And when you throw that together with the scientific name Stelgodopteryx ceropennis, you're looking at, I believe it's 52 characters here if you write it out. And I always have to abbreviate that whenever I'm making bird lists. So that's a really exceptionally long one. But it's fun to look at what's in a name, right? So the Tachycynetta is rapid flight. And then we can look at the specific epithets for these 2 species. So bicolor, 2 colors, and we'll see all about that in the tree swallow. And we'll see how sea green plays out in the violet green. And you look here on the lower right. Can you imagine which of those greens is the sea green? Maybe they both are. And Rhiparia, the bank swallow, associated with rivers. So we think riparian forest, riparian trees associated with rivers. And the bank swallow, you know, is known by another name in other parts of the world. It's the sand martin. So here it's the bank swallow. And look at that, Stelgodopteryx ceropennis. Now, I said most of the names are straightforward, but this one, what is a rough wing? What's rough-winged about it? Well, it has these little microscopic barbs, the males do, on the outer primary, and that's the rough wing. So we don't worry too much about that, but that's the name we have. You can look at the rest of those. So it's kind of fun to consider those Latin names and what they mean. All right, so first thing always you got to keep in mind is the what, when, where, and why of our bird ID. That's the status and distribution. And first, let's begin with looking at where these swallows occur. And what we can notice just looking at these distribution maps for all 6 of them, arrayed in that same swallow buddy system pattern, is that they are all distributed all the way across Canada and the US, except for one species, and that's the violet green swallow, which is a Western species only. And we see that 3 species winter in Mexico and Central America. So that's the violet green and the, the violet green and the tree and the rough-winged swallow wintering in Mexico and Central America. But 3 of them, the other 3, bank, barn, and cliff, go all the way down to South America. So let's use our Colorado Breeding Bird Atlas to give us an idea of where these swallows nest in the state. It informs our understanding of ID a little bit because we've got to know what to expect where and when. Now we're entering into, hopefully soon, the thick of migration time, and kind of anything is possible then to a degree here along the Front Range especially, and in the Denver metro area. But later, by the time we get to late May and into June, birds are going to be distributed where they're nesting. And so that's what we're looking at here. And we can see with the tree and the violet green that they are Western and montane species in Colorado. And the tree a little bit oriented more northerly. The violet green is really the mountain species. It's a forest species. The tree associated more with open country, but we'll get to that in a minute. So let's look at these 2 earth dirt swallows, and we see that they're much more patchily distributed than the tree and the violet green. That's because they're habitat specialists. The things that they need only occur in certain spots that are providing the banks and the burrows that they need for their nesting. So they're much more limited in where they occur, but both occur pretty broadly across Colorado. The bank swallow, a little more northerly distribution. Then the barn and the cliff are really abundant in certain areas, and we can see that they do indeed have a strong association with people, with agricultural, with rivers, with development. These are the things that are providing them the nest sites they need structurally and water sources to provide the mud that they need to build their nests. You can really learn a lot from these maps if you look carefully. Like you can look at the barn swallow and you can see the San Luis Valley here with all of its agricultural elements down here, which is attracting barn swallows. And even up here with hay and so on up in the North Park and other agricultural areas in Western Colorado and certainly all across the prairie, barn swallows find those resources all over the place in places where people are. All right, so another thing you need to consider in our status and distribution look here is the idea of bird habitats. And we're going to look particularly at the nesting habitats. During migration, again, kind of like all bets are off sort of in a way in the area where we are here along the Front Range, anything's possible. But when the birds are nesting, they're looking for certain resources. So the cavity nesting swallows are the tree swallow and the violet green. The trees like to nest in snags and in nest boxes, but they don't really use the cliffs that the violet greens like to use. Trees are mostly solitary, can be grouped. Violet greens mostly solitary. They'll aggregate where there's a lot of nesting holes available. And we see the violet greens nesting in cliffs where they find crevices in the rocks, and also in homes and crevices in buildings and other sorts of places like that. So they'll live right amongst people. And then we have the two dirt nesting swallows here, and they're both burrow nesting species. They require soft sediments to burrow in, and usually it's near water. And in the case of the bank swallow, they nest in colonies that can be kind of smallish to moderate size to pretty good size of maybe a couple hundred pairs. And their colonies are interesting because some of them aren't there over the long term. They're in ephemeral settings, banks along rivers wash out and erode away. And so they're not always, the particular site might go away or might be more long lasting, but they need particular sorts of sediments to burrow in that are soft enough. And they do make their own burrows, as does the rough-winged swallow. And it also uses burrows made by kingfishers and maybe even bank swallows, I don't know. But these birds carry stuff into those burrows, the little grasses and little stick that this guy's got here. And the rough-wing is different than the bank in that you tend to find them just as individual pairs or maybe loose groupings of pairs, but they're not colonial in the same way. The barn swallow is similar that way. You can have loose pairs here and there, or loose groupings, but not especially colonial. But this is one of our mud swallows. So they're attaching their things onto our structures. Now, historically, barn swallows would have used caves and crevices and probably been a lot more limited in Colorado than they are now. But now they're nesting pretty much exclusively on man-made structures and man-made situations on our buildings and so on. So that's very interesting. And the cliff swallow also has adapted largely to use human-made structures for its nest substrate, where it builds these gourd-shaped mud nests. But it's less wedded to that than the barn swallow. And you can still find cliff swallows in natural cliff settings, which are always such beautiful places. All right, here's some collecting mud. It's fun to watch them. It's a very social activity for them to collect the mud for their nests. Other individuals from the colony will come down. Pairs might do it together, or one might be in the nest waiting for the other to bring back the mud pellet. So let's take a look at the timing. We can basically see these three graphs for our three buddies, pairs, all kind of have a similar pattern. These birds are all highly migratory. They go away after the end of summer, basically the very beginning of fall. They go away and they don't come back till the beginning of spring. And they're all kind of similar, but the timings are a little bit different. The tree swallow is our earliest. We have tree and violet green on the left. These graphs are showing frequency. So it's basically showing how often they're encountered on eBird checklists. And this is an average of all the data in eBird. So it may not reflect our current situation. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But as we look on this, we see the tree swallow, and I've kind of summarized in the table down below, is arriving in late March. So it's the earliest arriving out of all the swallows. The last arriving is a cliff swallow over on the right. But most of the swallows are coming in the early part of April, like right about now. And ordinarily, you could go out and find some moderate numbers of swallows about now. As you can see from these graphs, the tree swallow frequency graph is up quite a bit by the time we get into the second week of April on average. And so these guys are going to peak you can see all these swallows peaking sometime in May, and then their numbers kind of drop off a little bit as it falls back to just the breeding population. And we can notice that the two species seem to have something going on at the tail end of the season. The violet green swallow has this little fall bump going on, and the barn swallow definitely has this fall bump going on. And we can see the barn swallow extends its season much later than the other swallows. So all of the others really are out of here by mid-September for this front range region of Colorado. And it's only the barn swallow that lingers on regularly to mid-October in our area, and even later a little bit further south in Colorado. So that's a little unusual. But the barn swallow and the violet green, they have an influx in the fall, and you can really see this on the barn swallow abundance graph here. You can see the numbers really increasing in the fall movement period. So it's different from our other swallows. Now, we should be seeing a lot of tree swallows right now, according to that graph I've got there on the upper left. But what is actually going on right now is a little different, because spring 2023 is off to a slow start. The arrival of trees and actually the other swallows that should be here now is delayed. So we don't know what's going on exactly, right? But what I've seen is there aren't very many swallows around, and this is showing frequency again. And you can ignore look at this purple line on the bottom and ignore this flat part because we haven't got to those weeks yet. So we'll just look at this front part, and we can see that it's the start of the climb for tree swallows is delayed in time relative to these other 4 recent years that we can do with this eBird graph. So indeed, things are off to a late start, and I can see that with the barn and the rough-winged swallows, which are 2 other species in the bank, which should already be showing up in our area. So that's kind of cool. We'll see what shapes up with the season. So before we can work out the swallows, we got to consider something else. So all swallows are swift, and all swift swallows swallow, but how do you tell them apart? All right, so we've got swifts and swallows, and they're both up in the sky, and sometimes they're in the sky together. And they're not closely related, but they can appear similar. So the swifts are in the order Apodiformes, family Apodidae, different family than the Hirundinidae of the swallows. And swifts, they can't perch like swallows. Swallows are perching birds, remember Passeriformes. But they can perch, but swifts cling. Of course, they imagine chimney swifts in their chimney clinging. Swifts are generally bigger, our swifts I'm talking about here, and they're slimmer bodied even than swallows. Their wings are longer and narrower at the base, so they have a sickle shape that kind of curves back in a lot of wing profiles that you see. And the wings are stiff looking relative to swallows with chopping or twinkly wing beats. And you know what? Swallows are fast, but swifts are, they're swift. They're faster than swallows. So the main things you need to consider for the most part in the ID challenge would be chimney versus other swallows. And usually if you get a halfway decent look, the overall dark coloration of the chimney swift together with its shape characteristics is going to get you there. And then with the white-throated, the main thing that you're worried about is the violet-green swallow, because these 2 species occur in the same habitats. The violet green and the cliff are associated with cliffs, rock escarpments, and they often nest together. So you'll often see them in the very same places. And so we put a little highlight here on those species, and we can put together these differences. We can look at the different wing shapes. Look on the right-hand side, the very broad base of the wing of the swallow versus the much narrower base of the wing of the swift, giving them a very different wing shape. You'll never see a swallow with this kind of long sickle profile, and their wings beat differently and bend differently. So you have a very different flight characteristic. But you can see between these 2 species that there are indeed some good visual similarities. And we'll sort that out a little bit more as we get into the violet-green swallow. So here we go. It's time to go into our first swallow buddy pair. And we have the tree and violet-green swallow. And behold these beauties. These are two gorgeous birds. I think the tree swallow must be my favorite swallow. I just love the metallic blue. It is just such a gorgeous color, and they are such clean looking birds. Sometimes the color can actually look kind of green, so we could call it kind of a blue-green, but in the best light, it is a metallic blue. And I like to think of it as kind of similar to like a blue you might have on like a really souped up sports car that's looking really cool, you know. And notice on these tree swallows that they remember their name was bicolor. All right, so Tachysonetta bicolor, meaning two colors, and they indeed have two colors, that blue to green blue and white. And the white underneath is just this beautiful clean white. And notice the very nice demarcation on the face between the blue of the head and the white of the throat and onto the breast here, very clean. There's no blending or anything like that. So notch tail, we'll take a look at that in a little bit when we get to some flying birds. That bicolored effect, tree swallow's rump is dark and it is a gleaming white below, and that male is that metallic blue. All right, so the females are a little different. They're similar in pattern to the male, but the coloring can be different to pretty close. And so they're brown to variably bright blue. All right, so here's a brown female at a nest hole here, and she really has no coloration much apparent here at all. We can still see that very nice demarcation on the throat here with no white coming up on the face. Can't see much about the rump, but we can see it's brown here and white underneath. And notice kind of the tone of the brown. All right, so here's another younger female with a male, and the younger females in their first year, when they're 1 year old next year, and again in their second year to some degree, and even into their third year, they can retain some brown. And some never get as bright as males. Some do get rather bright. In this pair here, the male's on the right, the female's on the left. Her forehead is a little duller, and the side of her head is a little duller as well. That's a male and female pair, but she's really bright. So they kind of vary in that way. All right, so now the violet-green swallow is I'm going to just back up because I just want to look at these colors a little bit on this swallow. Notice there are three colors on the upper parts. You can't always appreciate all three. So whenever you get the opportunity in good light, usually on a perched bird or maybe in a photo of a flying bird, you want to take advantage of that. But there is kind of a matte green above. It's kind of a foresty green in a way. And then there's an iridescent green, again, like a hot rod car green. And then there's this purple down here, which is really a special color. So the violet green, what do you see that's prominent on these images? You see the white on the face coming up behind the eye and is really showing up all around the face. Now look at that tree swallow, all dark in that area with that nice clean demarcation across the bottom of the face. Not so with the violet green swallow. The violet green is smaller than the tree, and it has that white extending onto the face and also onto the rump. So here we're looking at the backside closed wing, and we can see that white peeking out. So let's take a look at this flying bird, and you can see it's got like white saddlebags back here. And the white is coming from the underparts and wrapping around to the top of the rump. It doesn't actually connect, although in some views it appears as it does, depending on how the bird's holding its feathers and posture and all that. Usually there's a dark part down the middle, but the white goes way up there, very different from the tree swallow, where the white would only come up right along the edge of the rump. All right, so some fun quotes here about the purple on the violet green, because it's really an elusive color to appreciate. So the male bright green above with that iridescent purple below, and the female is a little different. She's duller. She has a grayer face, and her green isn't as bright. And so she's kind of brownish to grayish often on top of her head, but she has kind of the same general look. And notice there's no clean cut line on her face. So here's a question for you. If you've ever lived around violet green swallows, they wake up in the middle of the night and they fly around at 3:30 in the morning or like that, and they call to each other. Pairs, this is during the time when they have not fledged young, And you go out and sometimes you hear it, not every night, and nobody really seems to know what they're doing up there. One great resource for bird info is on the Birds of the World. You look in their species account and they make a couple, you have to hunt for it, make a couple vague references under vocalizations to the fact that these birds are flying around well before daylight, but they can't explain there what's going on. So a little mystery there. Somebody might know the answer. I didn't research too hard on that, but I have never been able to find it. So now we go to our dirt swallows here, our two brown and white swallows, the bank and the rough-winged swallow. And when we look at the bank swallow, we can notice a few things right away that are different. One is it has a striking pattern on its underparts. It has a well-defined breast band, often showing this projection down the middle of the breast. Sometimes that's more evident than other times, but usually you're seeing that pretty strongly. So you have that nice collar or breast band with that projection down the breast, very strikingly demarcated. And notice the white of the throat is clean. And again, like the tree swallow, kind of a nice clean demarcation. And notice on this upper part of this bird on the left that it has a great grayish tone. And so the bird's not only brown, but it's a gray brown. It almost matches that dirt that it's sitting amongst. But there's a little color contrast there. So when you see that grayish quality, that's a good mark on a bank swallow. At a distance, when you're looking at the back of the bird, you can't see the breast band or maybe flying birds. You can see it contrasting a bit here with the brown on the rump and upper tail coverts, and also with the browner wings when the wings are open. You can look over here to this rough-winged swallow and look at the color differences. Those are real things you can see out in the field. So the bank is the smallest swallow, and that's often evident when you see it with other swallows or just flying by itself. It looks very compact. The rough-winged swallow is bigger, and it has a different wing stroke than all the other swallows, certainly different than the bank swallow. I like to think of it as a lazy wing stroke. It has these long glides and slower flaps, and it's often flying over slow-moving water. And so I kind of think lazy rivers and streams, and that's kind of how I remember it. It's a bigger swallow, and with that wing stroke, it is distinctive in that way. But notice the wash on the throat going onto the breast. It's kind of like a messy, I call it a pig pen messy face. Has kind of a mousy quality to the look on the face as well. There's no clean demarcations. There's no breast band, and it is just kind of a nice blended sort of a look. Tree swallows have distinctive calls that sound like little farts. There you go. I wasn't sure I could pull that off, but I did. Little farts as they fly around. So if you hear that flying around, think a rough-winged swallow rather. I think I said tree swallow, but rough-wings have those little fart calls. If we look on some of these birds on the bottom, I'm just looking kind of again at that kind of mousy look to the face. Gives kind of a big beady eye look somehow, and the kind of blended look on this flying bird. You can contrast it with the bank swallow there, and get a sense of how those differences are on the underparts. There are white-bodied underneath, but they're both kind of, because of their brown markings in their different ways, they never look as clean as the tree and the violet green do underneath. So let's move forward to our two mud swallows. And, you know, how many mouthfuls does it take to make a nest? Have you ever wondered that watching the barn or the cliff swallows make their nest? How many mud pellets are there? Well, you know, I didn't know the answer to that. I do know how many licks it takes to get to the center of the Tootsie Pop, and that's exactly 3 crunch. But we'll figure out about the swallows later. So let's look at the barn swallow. This is one of the most beautiful swallows, I think, because of its proportions. It's a pretty good sized swallow, and it has a slim body and long wings and a long tail. And so it just has this beautiful shape to it. The tail, of course, we're all familiar with the deeply forked tail of the barn swallow, which is unique among our swallows. Orangey underneath and steel blue upper parts. And they have these cheery, twittery calls. You often see barn swallows foraging low over the water, skimming over fields in that kind of low situation when they're foraging. Notice in this bird's perched on the wire here, you can see their long tails and they're forked. Often, sometimes when they're perched, the tail might just look like a long pointed tail without noticing the fork if the two sides are lying close together. So that could be the case, but it's very long and different. And down there on the mud connecting, on the ground connecting mud sometimes. Their upper parts are basically unmarked, so you don't see, like on the flying bird, there's no pale rump, there's no paleness about the head in particular, even though the forehead is colored. It doesn't stand out, especially when you're looking at the bird flying around. That's not the case with the tree swallow. I'm sorry, with the cliff swallow. Notice our cliff swallow on the right here, or other of the mud nesting swallows, and it has this nice bright headlamp or headlight right here on its forehead. It's a great mark for adult cliff swallows in particular, and it shows up at a great distance, very different from the barn that we're looking at. The cliff is more of a medium-sized swallow. It's stockier and not so slim, and it has kind of a squarish tail. Now, one thing I'll say now, in case I forget to mention later, when you're thinking about tail shape in swallows, you want to consider how they're flying, and especially if you're looking at a photo, because in that moment, the tail is going to be maybe spread or held close together or in between, and you kind of want the relaxed in between, not the wide open spread. So if you look at this cliff swallow flying on the bottom right, it's pretty much a squared off tail. If it was to spread its tail more, it would be even kind of rounded looking, not squared. Even on the barn with this deep fork, when it has its tail widely spread, we see it's just the outer tail feathers that look especially long, and the others look in this view to be sort of similar length because of the way the tail is spread. So you want to consider that. But anyway, back to the cliff swallow, squared tail. And it is also blue above like the barn swallow, but it has a pale rump. So you put the pale rump together with the pale headlight on the forehead, very distinctive pattern there. And in flight, a buff collar stands out strongly as well. And they are kind of pale underneath, but they're not clean underneath like the tree. And notice they've got this nice dark throat, so you don't look up and see a white-bodied swallow with a white throat like on a tree or a violet green, but you see this dark throat contrasting with the pale body. All right. So tree swallows like to forage in swarms often. They will often group where foraging is particularly good. They find it by communicating within the colony. They find the feeding hotspots, and they often will be in groups near the colony as well. So that's one of their characters. And I did read that an average cliff nest contains 900 to 1,200 individual mud pellets. So there you go. That's how many mouthfuls it takes to make an average cliff swallow nest. Crunch. All right, so summer family fun. One of the beautiful things about swallows is they nest where we can view them, and sometimes we can view them rather intimately and see what's going on. And nothing is so endearing as baby swallows in the nest. And one of the things that you notice right away with these baby barn swallows is they are putting on a show with their gapes wide open, not only providing a big target, but also a big highlighted circular target. Now remember, the barn swallow is feeding out in the open, and its nest is in a shaded setting, as are the nests of other swallows. And the bird's coming in, and all of a sudden, its eyes have to adjust to the light, and it probably helps a whole lot that here are these bright gapes, these borders of the mouth that are helping it to find where to poke those bugs. And so as the birds get a little older and after they fledge, that gape is going to be something we're going to want to look at to help us identify young swallows. So summer's juveniles have these features. They have pale gapes. And sometimes it's really obvious, like on the barn swallow. And some other swallows, it might be a little harder. Notice where that gape is located. The corner of it here is back here underneath the front of the eye. So it looks like the bill on an adult swallow, you'd say the bill is kind of ending here, but the gape kind of disappears. Then on the young one, because it's yellow, it shows up better. So we see it going way back there. The feathers on these birds are very fresh. Notice these wing feathers down here, these primaries on the wingtip, and they have these pale edges. And you can see all these feathers have nice pale edges. Look on the back, pale edges on these back, on the rump and upper tail covert feathers. And that the feathers also are very fluffy in some areas, particularly along the back. These are brand new fledglings, so they have this fluffiness then that's going to go away. The plumage looks soft, and it's generally duller and paler than the comparable adult of that species. And these swallows have short tails relative to adults. They're still growing a little bit. All right, so there's our gape line, our fluffy features, our fresh flight feathers, pale tips that will wear off as the bird gets just a little bit older. And you can often identify the swallows, even if, usually it's not too hard, but the adults are coming in, bringing in prey, they're begging. They like to sit in groups, and the adults will come in to find their young family groups. They're sitting there and they'll beg. And here you can see the bolus of insects in the throat of this barn swallow coming in to feed that one. And maybe the other one's going to miss out this time. But next time with the parent coming in, it'll probably get its share. All right, so let's take a specific look at the youngster species by species. So the tree swallow, we're basically looking at the same features we look at on the adult. It's bicolor with the clean demarcations. There is a difference in that they have a little wash of brown across the breast, and it varies from individual to individual, some more than others, but it's always confined to be strongest on the sides of the breast, and at the middle is either lacking altogether or decidedly faint. So not like a bank swallow in that regard. So there's our tree swallow. It's kind of brown above like the female tree swallows we saw earlier. The violet green is kind of similar that way, but kind of gray brown upper parts instead of green. There may be a tinge of greenish, and its upper parts are lightly washed with gray, so it's not as clean looking as the tree swallow. Notice on this bird here, that same kind of blended look on the face with the kind of messy demarcation versus the very clean demarcation on the tree swallow. The white comes up a bit here on the back part of it. That's kind of the way the bird's hunched its head down. So this is actually the very upper part of the side of the breast, not the same as the side of the face here coming up behind the eye. Notice behind the eye, it is dark there. All right. So we'll look at our bank swallow. The main things that are different on the bank swallow is they look a little messier, and the throat is kind of washed with brownish to pinkish. Otherwise, they look a lot like the adults. Here you can appreciate a little tone on the throat. And look at the fresh feathers, these tertials, primaries, secondaries, these coverts over here, even these scapulars, these feathers here on the upper parts are all fringed with pale, so that's giving it away as a juvenile bird born just weeks ago. The rough-winged swallow, the main thing that stands out to my eye is the very warm brown coloration given by the cinnamon tone on the feathers, especially around the tertials, this area here and on the back. Not such a great view of these perched birds here in the shrub, but you can see that same kind of cinnamon tone showing up. The barn swallow, this one on the left has just been fed by this adult. They just had a great acrobatic aerial feeding going on. And the juvenile on the left, you can look at his tail. It doesn't have those long outer streamers like the adult does. And it is drabber underneath. Those are the prominent main differences for the barn swallow. But if you get a close view, of course, it has this pale gape like I was describing before. This is fairly bright, this left-hand bird. It doesn't look a whole lot different than the adult, but the tail's shorter with that pale gape. The bird facing away, you get an appreciation for the fresh feathers and the dark drabber coloration. Cliff swallow, same story, drabber, forehead patch is dull. It's not distinct, not so helpful this time, but they're usually with adults, so that helps. More of a wash on the breast. All right, there's some perch. You can see some adults there showing off that white headlamp and a number of juveniles that are not so contrasty. All right, so we'll take a little time to look at flying swallows. And you might say, well, gosh, the time I had the trouble with identification of swallows is when they're flying. Why is he showing me all these beautiful birds perched? No problem there. But the thing is, you apply the same principles of what you see on the perched birds by and large to the flying birds to ID them. A few details of shape and tail shape are more apparent in flight, but generally you're using the same marks and features. So the tree swallow and violet green are both dark above and light below, but remember the tree is bicolored. So its rump is not white, and you can see the white comes right along the side of the rump, a little crescent there in that view, but doesn't come up onto the rump like we can see in the violet green swallow. Notice the tails on these birds. The tree swallow has a longer tail and it's more notched in a normal kind of best judgment position like this one is, versus the violet green down here. It has a shorter tail and it's not as deeply notched, a little more squared looking. It is notched, but it's not as deep because the tail's a little shorter. Notice on the spread-tailed bird how that looks even rounded. So the notch thing means nothing on that view when you get the photo back and you're trying to assess it. And you want to look at these other birds in a more normal, relaxed flight position. You can see on the violet green on the bottom, the white coming up around the face is very prominent, and the white on the rump is very prominent on these flying birds. Okay, bicolored and clean on the tree, white on face and rump on the violet green. Our two dirt swallows, bank and rough wing. The bank swallow, you have that prominent breast band and it's small. The rough wing is that brown wash on the throat. Remember, the bank has that nice demarcation, always a white throat, except for the juveniles, a little bit of a wash, but they also have that breast band. The rough wing in flight, you get that wash that just kind of streaks over the front. I like this kind of blurry right-hand picture on the rough wings here, and you just see like a wash of brown across here. There's no band, it's just brown, and that's often the way they look. It may not appear as dark as that, but you have that kind of wash around there. Broad-based wings as well. Barn swallow, long forked tail, orange underneath. Notice no bright rump. These bird here in this picture on the top is showing a fairly pale forehead, contrary to what I was saying, but we can look down at the cliff swallow below and we can see that pale headlamp and pale rump, excellent ID marks. And we look at the underneath side, it's not all white underneath, but the front of the bird is dark. Okay. So this from a distance, I'm not going to spend much time here because it's kind of what I was just saying, and we can look on this in the video afterwards if you want to spend more time. But you can apply those same principles, just kind of glance at these birds, see if you can look at the ones on the left and just kind of look at them and key them out based on what you see first on. I see clean white underparts, white throat, clean demarcation. I see white rump, white on the face. I see a breast band. I see a wash. I see white headlamps. I see another white headlamp there. I see orange under here in that long forked tail. So it's, given a decent view, sometimes it's not so hard, but we know we have to work for those views sometimes. You have to stay with the birds and try to get them in lighting. When you're looking at swallows against a blue sky, it's sometimes really hard to perceive the colors very well. If you can get them against clouds, especially darker clouds when they're flying, or against water if they're flying at a reservoir and down low, much better way to assess the colors than against a blue background where those details often disappear. So you can put that to work for you. Or if you're at a spot where there's a bunch of swallows, why kill yourself with bad lighting if you can reorient around the pond or a little bit to get some decent lighting? So see how it goes. So now we know it all. So it's quiz time. I dare you to swallow this one. The question is, what kind of bird is this? So we're going to put together the stuff we learned. So you're looking at this bird, and we've got a clue here, but this is not a trick question, but things may not be as they appear, as is often the case in bird bombs. And so here we go. What do you think? Now, of course, it's not a prairie falcon. This is a trail sign for the Prairie Falcon Trail at South Valley Park here in Jefferson County. But this is a, what do you think? So we see nice white underparts, and you can see it's dark on, the only part of the upper parts we can really see is the head face, and a nice demarcation there. And we've just learned that that takes us to a tree swallow. Now, I put female on there, I didn't mention before, but if I look at this, I see that her forehead looks kind of brownish. And that's typical of a lot of female tree swallows. They have brown there. I definitely am getting some green tones, even though the lighting and my picture is poor for the colors, but she has brownish forehead, so I call that a female. So here we have another image here, number 2. Now these birds are arrayed on some stalks of a plant called mullein. And this is a plant, I'll probably get spelling wrong, M-U-L-L-I-E-N or E-I-N. Mullein, and its flower stalks dry and last a long time into the next season. And this time of year, swallows are often seen perching on there during times of inclement weather, when they're kind of riding it out and it's cold and they just got to take it easy. And so you'll see large numbers of them perch. And here we've got a little flock, and I'm seeing some different colors. And what do you think? How many different kinds of swallows are there here, and what are they? Well, we see some that are white below and green above, like we were just looking at. So that maybe we know are going to be tree swallows. Then we've got some others that are orange above and generally blue above. And we can see that they have long tails. So this is easy, right? This is basics, Bird Bombs Basics, barn and tree. All right, and we got another group again on mullen stocks. Got to keep an eye on those mullins. Bluebirds love them too. And these guys, let's see. So how many species and which are they? I'll let you take a look. And it's a little hard because some of these are preening, and it makes it hard to assess what's going on. They may have their bill buried in their breast or their head over their backside under the wing. But we can still tell as we watch. And I think there's two different species here. And one of them looks just like the ones we had in the picture above with a really long tail, even though like in this upper right, see the long tail. So we know that's our barn swallow. And then we can see the white headlamps on the one of the others that has its head up properly is making it as a cliff swallow, and other features matching that as well. All right, so cliff and barn. All right, so number 4, we've got two different species because we got the lovey-dovey two together, and then we've got something else. I think they're lovey-dovey. One's littler than the others. We know the headlamp bird is the cliff swallow, and the other with the breast band and the streak down the middle is the bank swallow. And last one on this page here, I'll let you think. Something going on the breast there. So we're thinking that this could be a bank swallow or it could be a tree swallow because it's got basically clean underneath, but there's the tree swallow problem is that it's not supposed to have a breast band except if it's a young one, right? And there's the breast band is not darkest at the middle, it's darkest at the side. This is indeed a juvenile tree swallow. And you can see that the pale gape there underneath the eye is helping us to understand the young bird, as well as kind of fluffy looking and soft. All right, so we got to move on here. So rapid flyers, that's a hint if you remember the genus that is translated rapid flyers, that's the Tachycynetta. All right, so this bird, you can see some white underneath and hard to see the upper parts on most of these birds, but one of those there on the upper left, you can see it's all one color up above with no pale rump. So we're going to go with tree. And now we've got some swallows flying a little higher up and out away from the tree there. And what do we see about these? We see their face has a different pattern than on the tree swallow. Compare this face pattern to the one over here taking off near this twig. And you can see the white wrapping up behind the eye. And we see the tail looking kind of short. All right, so violet green swallow. You can even get a hint of the white coming up on the rump, even though our angle's not so good there. Here's another one, just kind of hard to see well, so let's kind of zoom in a little bit. All right, so two colors, white below, greenish above, not blue in this light, but more green, tree swallow. All right, so what about this one? Here's another one flying swiftly to the right. And wait a minute, something doesn't seem quite right. These wings are kind of narrow looking, and look at that, it's black on the sides. Yep, I have to put it up. This is a fool you. This is a white-throated swift, but I don't think I did fool anybody. But looking a lot like another species. So here we go, just by contrast, and we'll just say violet green swallow here, female. All right, and you can compare her to that white-throated swift, which she actually probably looks more like in some views than a tree swallow. All right, so violet green female. What about these guys? So both of our Tachycynetta swallows are here. And again, look to the face pattern, look to the face pattern. White coming up behind the eye marks a few of these obviously as violet green. The one we can see well on the top left, the tree. Okay, we're going to have just a couple more slides here. We got getting a little bit harder. So we've got this flying bird. What strikes you? It's pale underneath, but not everywhere. So the throat area is dark, contrasting. It's going to give us really to one option, cliff. This one's a little more complicated because we clearly see we've got some different birds. There's only 5 birds, but guess what? There's 4 different species in this picture. Are any of them easy? Well, the one in the middle on the wire looks kind of easy to me because it has that distinctive band on the breast. Notice it's a little bit smaller looking than the others too, particularly the one to its left. Okay, so we've got that guy in the middle with the breast band. The one on the right has a white headlamp, and that dark throat and pale rump showing up here. So that's actually pretty easy. And the one here on the left has a brown wash on the throat, no pale headlamp or anything, and it's a little bit bigger. And then up on top here in flight, we can see this is a bicolored bird, the top one, without white coming up on the rump or white behind the eye. This one we can't see too well, this lower flying bird, but it also looks just dark above. So did you get them? Cliff, bank, rough wing, and 2 trees flying there. That's kind of fun. These guys are not making life easy for us because they've got their heads in the foraging position, obscuring different things, but we can see tail shapes well. And some underpart colorations. One's cooperating a little bit now, showing us its breast a little better, a nice clean white throat. Now they're both kinds are cooperating, and we can confirm bank and barn swallow. Okay, so here we are in August, probably on the sand spit, maybe out at Pruitt Reservoir or someplace where there's a few swallows hanging out. Maybe we're at Chatfield, actually, near the Plum Creek Delta. I don't know, but some swallows here on the ground. And I can see the one in the middle looks kind of brown above, not blue or just really dark, but brown. And the others look kind of a pale orange underneath. Then there's a bird in the back. So just based on what we can see with brown and kind of white underparts and kind of a smaller size and that orange underneath on most of these other ones, we're going to go with barn and bank, of course, the killdeer in the back. All right, so one last gulp here. I want you to tell me which species are we looking at? Probably not too hard. What age is it? And then what are some of the things you looked at to tell you what age? Maybe your gut just told you because you're red hot, but if you're looking at particular things, what could it be? All right, so this is a barn swallow, and it is a juvenile barn swallow, one of our summer swallows. And we're looking at the yellow gape as a giveaway for a juvenile, the fresh feather edging on these primaries and secondaries and tertials, and the kind of dull coloration and kind of the soft look to the bird. All right, so now last, we're just talking about these feathers. So I want you to visualize, can you spot these different feather tracks on this barn swallow? Okay, so it's where's that on the bird barn swallow edition? And here you go. So remember, when the wing closes, the inner feathers fold on top of the outer feathers. So the primaries are on the bottom. They're really long on swallows. And then the secondaries are folded here on top of the primaries. And then the tertials on top of them. Some greater secondary coverts over the secondaries. Scapulars hanging over the shoulder of the swallow. So cool deer. Cool deal. One last thing here. There's a Bird Bombs caption contest. So take a look at this picture. The cliff said to the tree, and send me your, email me your captions. All right. And winning captions, I'll present and share them in the next Bird Bombs. Hopefully some of you will come up with something creative, because this cliff swallow clearly has something to say to this tree swallow. So email me your caption, or come back and look at this later on the video. If you want to think more about it, take a screenshot right now. If you want to save the picture right now, come up with a caption, email it to me, and we'll see where that goes with our next Bird Bombs. So I want to say thank you to all of our photo contributors. More than 24 photographers contributed images to Bird Bombs tonight. Without your fantastic images, we wouldn't be able to put the show together like this to share with everybody. So I really appreciate your contribution. And the images are credited on each of the slides. And you know, we've been talking about spring swallows, and we're still waiting for them to come in, but very soon, in just a few months, we'll be looking at those summer swallows, and our hearts are going to be bursting with swallow joy and happiness. So thanks a lot for watching tonight. Our next Bird Bombs is coming up in just a few weeks. In the meantime, this episode will be put up on the webpage in just a day or two, I hope. And we have a Bird Bombs page now with an archive of all the past episodes of Bird Bombs. So check that out on our programs page on dfobirds.org. We have a Bird Bombs page there. Our next episode, May 4th, it's a flycatcher. So prime time to talk about all these flycatchers that are coming back. presenting lots of different challenges. And what I want to look at is how can we begin to sort them out, and what's the best way to kind of learn how to do that when you're presented with different birds in the field, some of which you're not so familiar with. So it's a flycatcher, May 4th at 7 p.m. So I'm going to stop screen sharing here, and we'll go for our Q&A with Laura, and hopefully you guys have some questions for me or something to share. Let me stop my share. Cool.
Hey, thanks, David. I see it got dark in my room while I was sitting here. Yeah, thanks for that. That's awesome. Yeah, if you do have a question for David, please drop it in the Q&A. I'm watching that. First off, I wanted to say I really appreciated the rough-winged swallow sound imitations.
Oh, yeah.
The 13-year-old in me appreciated that. Carol Buckley asks, is there just one species of swallow that buzzes street intersections? I wonder if you could talk about why might a swallow buzz a street intersection in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it is a barn swallow, is a habitual street intersection swiper, but probably others do too. But that's the one I see mostly is the barn swallow, and it's often just one or two, and they probably have a nest not too far away. And what I think is going on is that the environment over the intersection somehow is attracted to insects, and obviously that's why they're there, because they're foraging. And so there's bugs there, and something about that, maybe all that asphalt, and there's probably times when there's no cars crossing through parts of it that make it good places to forage. So I think that's what's going on right there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, Archer asks, do purple martins show up every year in Colorado?
Yeah, I didn't focus on the purple martin to keep our time a little bit short, but it's a fascinating species in Colorado. They're annual, but if you want to see them, you have to go to the western slope to places like counties like Garfield, Mesa County, or up in Rio Blanco County and the Flat Tops. They like to be up in the mountains, and they use aspen groves where they're nesting in cavities, often near lakes, other water areas. Not always, and so up on the Uncompahgre Plateau. The great thing is when you get to where purple martins are, unlike our other species, which you can see without too much effort, you've gotten to a beautiful place because they nest in gorgeous country. So it's worth it, but you got to go over there. Here on the Front Range, there really are just a few records, and similarly out on the prairie, very sparse. So
yeah, for sure. In regards to the violet green swallows calling in the middle of the night, if you want to hear it, I camped once at Alvarado Campground, which is west of like Canyon City area. And I camped underneath an old aspen tree that they were nesting in. And at about 4 a.m, they just started chattering off. And I have a eBird report with a recording of, it was a bad one because it was from my cell phone at 4 a.m. But this is the coolest thing. So if you ever want to try to hear that, Alvarado Campground is, I guess, the place to go. It's it's the only place I've ever heard it. So
yeah, it's
really cool. And what a mystery. Like why were they like, I mean, it sounded like they were flying around. And
yeah, they're flying, and it's the breeding adults, and they are so it's not young birds or family groups. But in my experience, they don't do it every night necessarily, and I think they do it more where there's more of them around. Like in areas that have more violet green. So if you have just like an isolated pair or something, you might not hear them as much doing that, because I think it's definitely a social thing going on.
Yeah, cool. I guess another question for you is, do you have any theories onto why we're having a late swallow season so far? Like, did you happen to look to see, like, is New Mexico having a late season too? You think they kind of come up through New Mexico?
I did not do any research there, and it'd be total conjecture. And the things that seem obvious, the things that seem obvious are that somehow the prey is not available. But how do the birds read that? So if they're assessing it en route, like you're saying, for example, in New Mexico, they're finding things sparse, so I'm not going to push on any farther. That may be a part of what goes on. But they can't know for sure what's going on up here. So, but they do move in increments. So they could be taking their time. It's been pretty cold, and
That's true.
prey populations could be delayed. I haven't looked into it. No, I haven't looked at the timing that eBird might reveal, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was maybe similar. But hopefully they'll all come in before long here,
Yeah, I
and
hope so.
it won't just be a slow swallow spring.
I hope not. Yeah. Let's see. Chris says that they saw 3 tree swallows today on the south end of Cherry Creek today. The first ones that they've seen.
Yeah,
It's awesome to hear. Yeah.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're trickling in.
They're starting to show up, hopefully. Yeah. Okay, last question for you. You mentioned, we talked about how easy swallows can be to observe in places because they're nesting on buildings or on bridges or underpasses, right? Like it could be really easy to get to observe. Do you know, as a set of species, are there studies that people can participate in to monitor a nesting site, or how populations are doing generally? Is there anything we should be looking into there, or just find our favorite bridge underpass and go hang out at it?
Well, a couple things. One is the thing that most of us do, and that's eBird. And it seems very pedestrian because we're so used to it. But when you report the breeding conformations, that is data that is accessible for, and you're also not just a confirmation, but what stage of the nesting cycle the nest is at, as far as you can determine it. And that is data that is available to researchers. So it is very broad in the sense that it's all eBird, but that's a great way just to very easily report things. There are different nest tracking studies. I don't recall the exact name right now. I know Cornell has another nest monitoring effort that's focused specifically on, if you find a nest, you're tracking it. It's eBird's a lot easier, but then you can also find studies that might be monitoring swallow boxes in different areas. If you ask your local community or parks if they have programs of swallow nest boxes where there's monitoring or even maintenance going on, that can be a way to kind of get involved in monitoring things. Off the top of my head, those are my ideas.